There's all this discussion about humanoids. A lot of our engineers are like, this is the coolest thing ever. It's going to replace everything. I'm like, no, it's not. There's no benefit in most industrial environments for having legs. You put something on wheels. You need to stop designing in a vacuum. One of our core marketing pillars is engineering by experience, that we want to get out there, see what the actual need is, and then build the solution for that need, not to just guess what it is that we think customers may or may not want.
Michael, coffee, tea, or something else? What fuels your mornings?
I'm one of the 10 people in the world that has never had a cup of coffee.
Wait,
I have,
what?
yeah, it's a little bit unusual. I'm not a big coffee drinker, never liked the flavor. At this stage of my life, I have 4 young children, and so they are all the adrenaline I need in the morning. And that's usually how I start my day.
Okay, straight to parenting. I feel that. When you were a kid, what did you think you'd grow up to be?
I've always liked math and science, and I always did fairly well in that. So I got my undergrad degree in engineering, and I always imagined I'd be doing something in engineering. I watched a lot of Star Trek, that sort of thing, and so I imagined myself working on the board of the Enterprise. And long term, the robotics is pretty much well aligned with what I'd hoped to one day be doing.
Nice. What's one technology that you can't live without?
So, as a general answer, I'd probably say something, like computers, but they take so many forms. I've spent much of my life playing video games when I was younger, or, now obviously most of my work is done on the computer. Phones are just another form of computer, and just like that in general, being able to connect with everyone in the world, being able to look up information, with very little effort. Hopefully, usually good information, not always, so certain. That is something I can't imagine a world existing without that.
That's probably my favorite answer so far from all the guests that we've had because it kind of encompasses everything. It's kind of cheating, which I like
Yeah,
it
a
because
little bit, yeah.
everything, even your Apple Watch is a computer.
Yeah,
You've got
I
computers
had
and
the good
everything.
fortune of going through Microsoft's. When you go visit them, I had an internship interview I was doing in college, and they had a fancy house of the future they'd put together, and this would have been in the early 2000s. And the big thing even then was just screens everywhere. They'd have a counter where you could get the recipe that you were cooking, and it would just appear on the counter. You'd walk into the house, and like all that seems kind of second nature now, but 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't quite as obvious. But it's what's come to pass, and I do think that technology is a great enabler. We have to do it the right way, but it's incredibly powerful, and I can't imagine our current world existing without it.
That. Love that. Okay, last one, and then we'll get into this. If you could fast forward 10 years and see one impact that your work has made on the world, what would you want that to be?
So my dream when I got into robotics is, maybe this is a little bit more than 10 years in the future, but 20 or 30 years, is I'd be able to go out into a field somewhere, push a button, and then you just have this kind of scramble of robots that would all come in and build a skyscraper in front of me over the next 30 or 60 days. We're pretty far away from that, but I'd like to be able to get to where we can fully solve a job type using robotics. But obviously, people are going to be very heavily in the loop in a variety of ways. But that just has been really neat to be able to do some software development, get the hardware working, and then just have something be produced in front of you.
That. Okay. Welcome to Machine Minds, everyone. I'm your host, Greg Terusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Michael Lawrence, Director of Sales and Business Development at Anantak Robotics. Thanks for being on the show today, Michael.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Let's jump into it. You've spent time across robotics, sales, business development, and commercial strategy in your career. What originally pulled you into the world?
So it was that same passion for just electrical engineering, robotics in general, what that meant, how I could solve things. I started my career over 20 years ago, and I was wanting to do something in robotics. It was around the time where the DARPA Grand Challenge was so popular. You'd have these cars driving across the desert and doing all these really neat things. And I thought, surely there's someone in industry that was, commercializing this and doing it at scale. And there really wasn't, not in the ways that I imagined it. There were other companies that were out there that were doing kind of subsets of it, or maybe call it partial autonomy, but nothing that I really thought, did the things that I wanted it to do. And so I dallied a bit. I went to go see how other companies were run. I got my MBA. It's still not anything that I thought was exactly what I wanted to see done. And so I decided in early 2010s to found my own company doing concrete polishing autonomy, where I created a little control panel that attached to existing concrete polisher equipment, and then have them go out onto construction job sites and do their job. And so that's where I started. And then since then, that was 10 to 15 years ago. I really wanted to expand and figure out where the right fit was, like why wasn't it working? It's not just the technology. The technology 20 years ago wasn't nearly as mature as it is today. It was also that commercial model of how do we build something? How do we work within the existing business ecosystem to bring something to life? The example I usually like to give there is that kind of Google versus Apple technology. So Google was the first to come to market with an NFC capability on their phones, NFC being the near field communication. And Apple was a fast follower, but they came after Google. And that is the technology that fundamentally enables the Apple Pay and Google Pay. But Google was not the first one that really enabled Google Pay. Like people with iPhones were the ones that were first paying for their product by leaving a company, like a grocery store or whatever. And the reason for that was that Apple didn't look at just the technology in the way that Google did. Apple actually took the time to work within that business ecosystem of working with the point of sale device manufacturers to make sure they included the capability to accept that NFC technology. They worked with the retailers to install those point of sale devices. They worked with banks. They worked with all those different groups to actually bring this to market. And that's what was missing early on with autonomy is that we could create great products, we could create these great vehicles that would do all the things you need to do them. But if you don't have the installers who are familiar with how to use them, if you don't have a service network built, if you don't have all the other kind of support technology and that business ecosystem addressed and having it accounted for in your business model, you're going to fail. And so I started more on the technological side. As I said, I had that degree in electrical engineering in undergrad from Rice, but then I moved over to the business side because I saw that that was where the actual miss was happening with bringing this technology to market.
Interesting. Okay. And then before joining the company, what did you, it sounds like you had like this whole journey about learning. So this might be a silly question, but I'm curious about what you actually learned about selling robots that most people outside the industry underestimate when you're talking to an end customer.
Yeah, it gets to that same partner side of things.
Yeah.
We stand on the shoulders of giants. So much has come before us, and it's almost disrespectful to ignore that that exists and that that's available. So I never really liked the idea of building custom or bespoke equipment. Others build much better vehicles, so let's use their vehicles. I don't think it makes sense to build separate networks. That it creates these redundancies, these inefficiencies in the market that are ultimately very costly to the end customer because then they have to pay for multiple dealer networks or whatever, which makes no sense. Like that's not the value that we're adding as an autonomy company. We add the value of the autonomy piece, and then we need to fit into that existing ecosystem, as I said. And I think that was very unclear to a lot of people. They just said, "Oh, build it and they will come." They would sign contracts at scale. Oh, I will buy 7,000 units, and I'll just find a market for them somewhere. And that didn't materialize. The other thing that's very clear, especially in the material handling space, is that the sales cycle is several years long. You're going to find a customer, they're going to want to vet you, you're going to have some sort of proof of concept, and then you maybe get a couple of units as deployment, and then you can scale beyond that. Most companies, even today, especially in the startup realm, haven't really gotten past that proof of concept or just the few units deployed at a given customer. That means the problem isn't solved. And so making sure you can get that full solution, which isn't just the vehicle, making sure you can do that within the existing ecosystem and being kind of respectful and cooperative and collaborative with your partners is critical. And I think a lot of companies miss that.
Yeah, that's a good point. In this role, you have to translate complex autonomy into real customer value. Obviously, it's a big part of what you do. What makes someone effective at that bridge between technology and the market, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's not even just between the technology and the market, it's between what people think can be done and what can be done, and being able to articulate what those differences are. So you have to have some sort of expectation about what they think it can be done, like how they're currently using the technology, what their use case, their workflows currently are, and then understanding where your technology begins and ends. What is it capable of doing? What's a small incremental improvement over what you're doing that may be achievable on a given deployment versus what's completely different. So if the customer's coming in and saying, "Oh, actually, I want that tugger to fly from one spot to another," that's out of the realm of reasonability. But if you wanted to say, okay, we had a request come in recently that said, given the occupancy of this waypoint, can a vehicle that's coming into it slow down, not stop? We would usually have a queue in a certain spot and just wait, but just have it slow down so that when this one's ready to go, that one could keep going. And being able to build a platform that can accept that kind of adjustment, and then being able to actually execute on that in real time is also meaningful. Many other competitors, they piecemeal what's available. So right now we have full control over our entire technological stack. We don't even use ROS, which many other competitors use, and so because of that, we have the power to influence the way that it's built. I spent a year working for LG. It was a great company to work for, but their development was all in Korea, and the sales was all in the U.S. And inevitably, if there's any U.S. requirement of how we wanted to do a new feature or build into that product roadmap, it was this very bureaucratic process, which it needs to be in large companies. But for a new emerging technology like autonomy, and I would still classify it as emerging, even though there have been flavors of autonomy for decades, then you need to have that control over the entire development pipeline so that you can respond to customers and to market needs in general until there's an actual physical product that is scaled and good. And no one's there yet.
Yeah, that's fair. For listeners who are new to Anantak, how do you explain what the company does?
We sell autonomous material handling equipment. So tuggers, pallet jacks, and forklifts. That's my tagline. But then beyond that, we obviously have all the support software. We have devices. Something that distinguishes us as well is that not only do, as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's not just about having a vehicle that can drive itself. It's about getting a solution that works for the customer. And oftentimes that means that you need to have a couple of accessory devices or you need to tie into their equipment in some way. And so we have a device called a Firefly, which is an audio visual box that has an LED panel and a speaker. It's IP65 rated, built for those kinds of environments, which is all great. But it's what allows us to kind of configure our solution for a given environment. We can plug it into their PLCs. We can put in call buttons so that an employee or worker could just kind of slam the button for it to do whatever it's supposed to do at that spot. We can put in TVs to show where the fleet is and all that kind of fun little visibility things. But all of that additional solutioning is critical, but it's a hard thing to really talk about because a lot of it, I think, is kind of table stakes. It's something that's assumed by customers, but isn't necessarily provided by all competitors. And so it's just something that they kind of have to experience as they go through a proof of concept and then ultimately a scaling with us.
Makes sense. So focusing on this autonomous movement inside, I'm assuming it's mainly like warehouses and manufacturing environments and things like that.
Yes.
What are the most painful problems that you're helping customers solve?
So, and the main focus for us is to give a holistic solution for specific material movement. And our broader mission would be to take any sort of bulk movement in a warehouse or a factory and have that become autonomous. You don't need a person to drive from one spot to another. Let them do something that's more value adding, like actually working the work cell or welding or doing the other things that they need to do, and then have the material just kind of move on its own. Now, there are different levels of that, and we try very hard not to have any sort of semi-autonomous solution. So our pallet jacks are able to fork, product themselves. They don't need someone to do it for them. We can be very flexible in how we deploy, not only the first time, but in the second and third time. So it works very well for 3PLs as well. That always have a dynamically changing environment, multiple times a year. And so it's all that additional work to get it to actually solve the customer need, because a lot of solutions that are out there, they don't really finish. They don't give a holistic solution to completely replace that material flow problem for them. And so I think that's the major pain point is that they just want something that does the thing they expect it to do. And we try really hard to build a platform that can do that.
You guys have like a emphasis on fitting into existing operations rather than like forcing these facilities to completely change how they work or how they're structured and things like that. Why is
Right.
that so important?
Yeah, I mean, so one, there's the kind of total addressable market. If we are only looking at greenfield environments, then that limits what we could possibly do. And sure, we like doing that because it's fine. But the less that we can impose on the customer, the more likely this is going to, drive adoption. It's going to be usable because the kinds of problems we have to solve to enable that adoption it's going to be applicable everywhere. And so we want to be able to do brownfield environments. We want to be able to meet the customers where they are so they don't have to entirely change their standard operating procedures. They're going to have to change something. So a story I like to give is that early in my career, there was a company that was an office space connected to a warehouse. And their kind of existing workflow was for a warehouse associate to print the pick list in the office, take a stock chaser out, drive it through the facility, pick the goods that they're the cases, et cetera, that they're getting, and then bring it back for shipping. In the new paradigm with autonomy, that vehicle would be driving itself back and forth, and that person would just be living in the warehouse, constantly picking cases. But now, how does he know what to pick? You have to solve that problem of the case picking because he got that list printed in the office, and that's no longer going. It's an easy problem to solve. You could put a printer back there. You could create an interface that has that list. If it's connected to your WMS or whatever else, have a digital copy. There are a bunch of different ways to solve it, but it needs to be solved. And so those are the kinds of conversations that you're going to have some degree of configuration or development or operational process improvement on the side of the customer. But we want to limit that to only things that actually are required by autonomy, not because our vehicle can only turn into a 15-foot wide aisle instead of a 10-foot wide aisle or something like that, which is, if their existing material equipment can do it, we should be able to do it too.
Awesome. And with the products, you obviously mentioned these tuggers and pallet jacks and stuff like that. Where have you seen, or where do you see with your customers that these systems create the fastest ROI?
Yeah, so I think there's another question this will dovetail into, which is that wherever a customer already has a well-defined standard operating procedure, and we can kind of fit into that and understand what KPIs they're looking for, what throughput, then our deployment process will be faster, and their adoption will be quicker, and that's where it's going to get the faster ROI because as soon as it can start operating productively, you could say that it's generating that quote unquote profit per minute that it's operating, and the sooner you can begin that operation, the better. Obviously, we try to target, we'd love to get to a 1 year or under. Realistically, most of ours are probably going to be in that 12 to 18 month range. We definitely need to beat that 2 year mark. Anything above that is just kind of infeasible for most customers. And so that's kind of where we're aiming for ROI, and it's just a matter of how quickly can we get it going. Inevitably, the actual sales process is going to be a year plus. So, if they bought it on day one, then we get there sooner, but that's never what happens.
Of course, yeah. I guess there's another aspect there as well. Like you mentioned, a human doesn't need to be moving this thing from point A to point B. We can free them up to do other stuff. So there's like other metrics and other things to factor into quote unquote ROI, which is probably hard to uh,
So
calculate initially, I would
yeah,
assume.
there's a really interesting like hour-long presentation by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, a while back, where he was talking about Git and various. One of the main points he was making was that the when you make a tool so good, people start using it in other ways because it's just so much more capable, and you start kind of it unlocks certain capabilities. That's kind of where we want to be. And the another example that's maybe a little bit more close to home for this is that when I was at Carnegie Mellon getting my MBA, one of the deans there, Michael Trick, was responsible for doing the baseball scheduling for the NBA, and I'm sorry for the MLB. Um, and prior to him engaging, my understanding was it took several months for a team of like 20 people to figure out when the baseball games could be played by which teams. And it's a difficult problem to solve because there's a certain structure around it. You have the home game, then two away, then two home, then two away. Are they going to play all 7 games? There's a secondary problem about the umpires and who's going to be, officiate the games and all these different things. It's a fairly well constrained problem, but it's so much so that it's really hard to just kind of put it on a napkin and hope for the best. So prior process was it took this team of 20 people a long time to figure it out. Michael Strick came along and created an algorithm that could solve it in basically 6 hours. He'd do a little bit longer than that, have two of his grad students help massage the data, but and get whatever they wanted. What this enables that the MLB could then like play around with it. Are there specific dates they want to try to include as additional constraints about where those teams would go? One year, Michael Trick, he's a Pittsburgh guy. That's where Carnegie Mellon is, and he loves baseball, and he really wanted the Pirates to play in Pittsburgh on his birthday. But he couldn't do it. Like the problem was not constrained in such a way, or was too
Yeah.
constrained that he couldn't actually get that to schedule appropriately. But that he could even try it, and he could see that yes, there's definitely not an answer here. It's something you can only do when you're able to iterate on your design frequently. And so if you have like an autonomous solution and you build it in such a way, which no one really is at, but where you could do a redeployment in like a couple hours, then you get to adjust your operations that much faster. You get to reach the optimal, material flow that much sooner. That becomes really empowering to customers. And we obviously want to get there. And I think everyone wants to get to a point where we can do that. But that's the sort of thing that you have a person kind of engineering or designing this process, which is a very high value task. And then you have the people that were there before giving their feedback, doing other things. Yeah, it's a really powerful unlocking of capability if we get to that stage of that efficiency of deployment and execution.
Yeah. It's exciting to think of what that could mean and what it would look like at that point.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about practical autonomy versus like the robotics hype that we're seeing a lot in the market right now. Because there's obviously a lot of robotics companies that talk about full autonomy, but within warehouses, they're obviously messy and dynamic and full of edge cases as well. From your experience and from what you guys do, what does practical autonomy actually look like on the floor?
Yeah, so operating in brownfield environments, we need to make sure that we can go where the work is and make sure that we can actually operate in environments that exist. So something you see very commonly right now, a big use case that everyone wants to solve is truck loading and unloading. And you'll see a picture on the websites where it has the back of a trailer with all these packages just lined up perfectly at the front of the trailer that they can come in and get it. That's never what it looks like. So one of our customers ships a lot of packages, and what happens is that they do have a heuristic. They put the first package in the back left, the second package in the back right. They have a way that they build it out to make sure that it doesn't move too much. But inevitably, after an hour of driving on roads, those cases get jostled, and and so when you open up the back of the truck, then you have this kind of cascade of packages that are just about to fall out of the vehicle. They're not nicely put together like that. And so practical autonomy is being able to deal with that. You don't like 0% of the inbound trucks are going to have a perfectly laid out, structure for these vehicles or these robots to operate on. That's in the lab. You need to be able to work with that kind of messy reality of tumbled packages and cases that are all sorts of different orientations and being able to manipulate them. The issue that there's one thing about cardboard, but I know that Chewy, for example, had a competition so that they could pick up their bags. Because for Chewy, or right now, I know it's spring season up here in Chicago. There's lots of mulch going around. For those kinds of bags, if there's any hole and you use a suction-based system and try to pick it up, it's not going to work because this is the reality of these things, and it has to, if you want this to be usable at scale, it has to work for all of those different, not even edge cases. I mean, those are core use cases that they need to solve. When it starts to be something that represents 1% or less, then sure, that's an edge case. But you have to be able to do all those things. And so for us, that means that there, again, it gets along with that no imposition. We don't require specific things at the customer site. We don't require racks that have certain pin structures underneath to be moved around. We don't require any sort of infrastructure adjustment. So we don't have April tags on the walls or magnetic tape on the ground or any of that stuff. It needs to work where they are, the way that they're used to using it.
Yeah, I think that's super critical because having it tailored to your product isn't the reality, right? Like you said,
Right.
brownfield, everything's going to be, especially with packages, that's such a, yeah, there's seasonal stuff. You think about holidays, right? There's going to be all shapes, sizes, wrapping, or everything going through. Where do you think the human in the loop approach is underrated?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, fundamentally with tuggers, which is where we started, since added pallet jacks and forklifts. But tuggers, you need someone to load and unload. And there are versions where you can do auto hitch or auto unhitch. There are things that you can do, but ultimately there's usually an interaction of loading or unloading those tuggers. And so there needs to be a human involved, and we have the interface on there to enable that. But you need to be able to account for it, and you need to have tools. You need to have alerts, even if there's not a human actually interacting with that specific workflow. You need to be able to alert them, hey, this is where I'm headed. Either have some sort of traffic system so they don't run into it, so that it stops at various intersections, so that the other human-driven vehicles or just human traffic in general can be aware of it. But also just any sort of other relevant communication to convey. A skilled worker can see, okay, now I see that that package is being delivered to station 7. I'm working at the output of station 7, so I should have some more inbound coming to me in 30 minutes or whatever it takes to process at that station. That communication is critical and really helps with that cobotic kind of application existing alongside the humans.
Awesome. Let's talk a bit about deployments and customer trust and scaling and things like that, because there's a lot that's like hype, again, as I mentioned before, but in demos, and what they can show online and what's like clickbaity and just for the hype. And then there's actually real world deployments that survive in these environments. From your perspective, what actually separates those? Like what you can do in a controlled lab and then what your real world deployment is going to look like with the customers that you really want to engage with?
So there are a couple of things. One, on our side, getting this technology to work in a way that is flexible and can meet the actual need that they're describing to achieve the actual throughput they're describing. That's all relevant. But I also want to say that there's a side of it for the customer. You need to have that customer champion that's making sure the project is actually kind of driven through the project, especially at large companies, whether they're union or otherwise. You need to have some sort of kind of change management process to say, hey guys, this is what's coming, this is what it should look like, and to be communicative, like very, very communicative about all that, and not only to communicate outward, but to take inbound, to take that feedback and say, okay, this is what's working, this is what's not. And so you need a partner that can actually adjust the process based on that feedback. No one knows the operational process better than the associates that are executing it. And so if they say, hey, this isn't going to work or that's not going to work, then listen to them and talk to us, and we can adjust it, right? And so but that's going to be a slightly longer process. It's going to be slightly more communication, going back and forth. It's going to be more to manage. But the end solution is going to be something that can stay for 10, 15, 20 years, and which can be easily kind of quote unquote replaced. I love finding an opportunity, often from defunct companies, where well, not from the customer, but the customer had some sort of well, like they'll have an example. I don't want to like name names, but of other companies that are no longer around, that they need an they need to replace that, and because that company is no longer around or they don't have the same support ecosystem or whatever, they're looking for new alternatives, and that's great for us because we can usually do whatever the previous company did. We're 10 years plus better technology as they would have been too. Um, but we can follow whatever route they were following. We could do the things that they were already doing. They'd already worked through a lot of that workflow definition, and then it's a much easier job for us rather than that more kind of evangelical. This is how we should be doing things. This is how you should alter your process. But yeah, as long as a customer kind of comes with open eyes about understanding how that workflow is going to adjust to account for autonomy, then I think you're going to have a strong success on the customer side. And then we need to also enable that flexibility on our side to make sure that we have that solutioning that I was describing before.
Okay. You guys, you're obviously like a small team, solid products. It seems like you're deploying, in great environments and having some success. You work with large companies as well, am I right? Yeah. Any notable ones or anything that you can share about what that looks like and what success looks like when you get into these larger companies and having champions internally?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit wary of saying it on the very public forum, so I won't name names
Okay. Yeah,
specifically.
don't name names.
Um,
Yeah.
a lot of the bigger companies don't like to shout these things out, which is fine. But in general, yeah, they've all followed that trajectory. So in one example, we've been with them for about 6 or 7 years, and we had that customer champion initially who helped us with like just basic feature development, things that we hadn't fully baked in or hadn't fully adjusted, very early in our life cycle. And then he was able to train some folks internally to get it up at the first site and get to the second site, get to the fifth site. And then they then had kind of a tiger team internally that was able to do these deployments. And we still work with roughly the same group of folks at that team. Some of them are now getting promoted upward, and we like to think that we have a role in their success because we've been able to
Yeah.
help them get successful deployments, and we take a great pride in that. But yeah, so that's kind of the nature of this. Every site within them, our founder has a quote that I really like that customers all like autonomy. Sorry, customers view autonomy like ice cream. They all like it, but they want their own flavor. And so even within the same customer, you get that. Even if you're on site number 7, it's not the same as site number 2 or 5 or whatever. They're going to have a different ramp problem or a door you have to integrate with, or just something that's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to dealing with. That's going to expand your capabilities in a good way. And so just developing that kind of internal team that you can work with. We're now with that particular customer, we're getting to the point where they are engaging less and less because we are just an established solution. We're in their standard. I forget that they have I forget the name of it, but they have a little thing that all their individual plant managers can go and buy new products. We're not some sort of fancy R&D thing. We're just an established vehicle that they can buy.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so that's kind of how you want to get to.
And from an industry standpoint, we obviously mentioned warehouses and manufacturing and stuff, but I guess that could be everything within that. You talked about logistics as well.
Yeah, so anything that moves material, right? And so the idea is that we probably have a little bit of a sweet spot for something that's maybe 1,000 pounds and up. We can do smaller than that, it's not a problem. But we're not really like Locust, for example, we're not really a competitor to them that do the case handling. We would be much larger scale. So our tugger can do up to 20,000 pounds. All of our forklifts and pallet jacks are 3,000 or more. And so we work well in moving, bulk material from either a warehouse to like a line feeding operation in a manufacturing center, or into going from, we're not quite yet at the truck loading and unloading. Obviously, we're targeting that as well. I think everyone is. But getting the truck loading, unloading, getting it to the staging area, doing the running from there into the kind of drop points that would then be put into reach trucks that go into the actual racking. All those kinds of use cases. Doing cross-docking is a big one. Doing mail kind of sorting, I guess, is another big one where we do the non-con use case. And so yeah, wherever we can that we need to move things that are reasonably heavy and unwieldy, we would be able to fit in.
That's great. What have you found that customers are most nervous about when they're adopting autonomous material movement?
I think a lot of it, I joke that like 80 to 90% of my job is education. And so a lot of them just don't know what's possible. And like you said earlier, there is a lot of hype. There's a lot of kind of confusion. Some companies say, oh, I can deploy in an hour. And I think it just kind of misunderstands what deployment should actually mean. It's not just about getting the vehicle up and running. It's actually going through the process and making sure it's repeatable and works. Others will say, oh, I don't need, it's a semi-autonomous solution. I need, one operator can handle 4 or 8 or whatever vehicles. Again, that's not really what most customers expect when they're going into autonomy. And so it's just kind of reassuring them that, yes, what we're trying to provide is what you're imagining. It won't be exactly what you're imagining. And let's talk through what you're imagining so I can kind of tell you what those disconnects may be. But that we can do a lot of it. And, let me help be your guide along the way. And most of that's going to happen before any sort of PO or anything like that gets signed. And then just for them to know that we are going to be there. But for any relationship, you start with zero trust, and you just have to build it by continuing to execute over time. They ask you something, you provide honest feedback, you give an honest response. and you come back, and then at some point later on, that they'll have to confirm that that speed that you said you could do, you can actually do. And then if you do it, then that builds a lot of credibility and trust. If you don't do it, then it's a problem. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to ask you about how you build trust with all of them, but that makes a lot of sense. How do you decide whether these customers are actually ready for automation or to deploy these solutions?
So I alluded to it earlier. If you have a standard operating procedure that's really well defined, that's very helpful. If you're a company that's constantly changing your environment and you're a 30,000 square foot facility and you've got some great growth and you're exciting, wonderful. It may not make sense for you to pursue autonomy just yet. But if you have a repeating process that's well established that you've been doing for however long, then yeah, there's probably an opportunity. I will say the math is almost always better from an ROI perspective if you're doing a quote unquote larger deployment, so 5 or 10 vehicles or more. But we do work, and I do think that we are, ROI competitive at the 1 or 2 vehicle level, and we want to continue that. I think that's the long tail, and inevitably, any company you start with is going to want to start with 1 or 2 to understand your technology better and to prove it out. Um, yeah.
Makes sense. When we spoke in preparation for this show, you described your role as more partnership driven than traditional sales. And then obviously now you mentioned the, 80-90% education as well. What does that partnership driven mentality and structure, what does that mean in practice?
So, like I said earlier, that I didn't think it makes sense to reinvent the wheel. And so the OEM partners that we have, for example, trust them to do their job and to do it well and to make sure that they get compensated for it. We're not trying to break into their margins or do anything like that. And similarly, do that with dealers, with system integrators, with any other kind of sales channel partners that we'd be looking at. Part of that is, putting our money where our mouth is and not hiring a massive sales team, because if you're gonna hire 20, 30, 40 sales guys, then you're gonna ultimately compete with them, and you need to justify your ROI, your own internal ROI on that sales organization. So we're not looking to hire significant amounts. We will have some, especially as we get more and more kind of marquee accounts. We'll probably get folks to align with that and make sure we can support the customer. But the bigger emphasis is going to be on that customer success piece rather than the pushing additional sales or additional components of solutions that they may or may not actually need. And so it's understanding where we fit in the ecosystem, understanding not trying to step on toes or overlap with what's already out there, building them, understanding it's not going to happen overnight, that these things take time to develop, what the work instructions are for the integration of the technology on the hardware side, of understanding how does service work and how do we support our dealer partners in providing that service, and what does that all look like? What is the parts list that we have to provide? And just all those kinds of basic things that, for one, we're a small company, so it's some of it's kind of new-ish to us, but we've had to deal with it kind of in a more direct capacity in the past. And so defining those kinds of systems and building that kind of business interface between us and our partners, and then living by it and not trying to do things just because we're at some rush to the market because we have investors breathing down our neck or something like that. We are privately owned, fully profitable and everything else, positive cash flow, all the good stuff, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say right now. And so we're able to actually really execute on the partnership side of things. And we recognize that it takes them a while too. As I've said, and I'll continue to say multiple times, it's like a 1 to 3 year sales process. It takes forever. And so if you're going to ask someone to give you trust for a year before any sort of dollars flow anywhere, that's a big ask. And you have to continue to execute. You have to continue to give answers, and you're not going to see any dollars from it for a while.
Yeah, that's good. It's good expectation setting as well, going into it like that. I think that's crucial, and not over promising and under delivering in
Right.
something where, especially with automation and in these environments, right? There's so many logistics and manufacturing facilities where they have their little robot graveyard in the corner that they've tried it before and their sales rep is no longer there or the product is no longer supported or whatever. So holding their hand and being that true partner throughout it is probably so valuable for them as well.
Absolutely. No, and we want to be able to say that credibly. We've been around for over a decade now, and we have long-term customers, and that means a lot to us. For a while we were concerned because we do have some significant customer concentration. We don't have 100 units deployed at 100 different places. We have a couple hundred with one customer, and we're going to continue to kind of have that kind of growth because we want to have that relationship and that long-term scalability within an individual customer. And that it's a little bit scary, especially if you do talk to investors. They say, oh, you have to have at least 3 or 4 companies that account for no more than 20% of your revenue. Else, like, oh, yeah, that'd be nice, but that's just not where the industry is right now. And you're not solving people's problems if you're trying to spread them.
Yeah, so true. How do you've obviously mentioned not stepping on toes and being a partner and, with everyone, OEMs, customers, etc. But how do you think about competitors in the market where the bigger challenge maybe more customer adoption, right, rather than like head-to-head rivalry?
So the way I usually go about that conversation is that there are 2 million forklifts sold globally annually. About 300 to 400,000 of those are in the US. I would estimate a very, very, very small fraction of those are autonomous, right? And so it's not a solved problem. There is a big pie out there, and there's plenty of room for all of us. We are all educating. We're benefiting from what every other company is doing in terms of saying what's possible, what's not. The language, we've gotten some like vendor questionnaires, and some of it is like older. I remember getting one from a major automotive OEM. It was asking about what kind of PLC we use, and I kind of wanted to uh, rebut them, saying, "Oh, I don't know what kind of crankshaft are you using to turn your motor over. Like it's just older technology for us. It's not. It misses the point a little bit." But it's that kind of vibe right now. Is that there's plenty of room to grow. There are plenty of opportunities. We do. Some of our partners, most of our partners, have other. In fact, I think well, most of our partners have other autonomy vendors that they're working with, and they have multiple autonomous solutions that are through them, and they know that we have multiple autonomous solutions through us, and that is good and that is normal, and we are all here to help each other. I'm not worried that any given solution is going to be so dominant right now because I just don't think that that solution exists. Maybe 5 to 10 to 15 years from now, where 100,000 forklifts are sold every year that are autonomous, then we'll have those kinds of concerns or questions. But we're very far away from that right now.
Fair. The environments you guys primarily operate in, downtime super expensive, right?
Sure.
How does that shape the way that you design and support systems that you deploy?
So one fun metric that we looked at recently from a customer ask was that for our existing fleet, our typical time to intervention, not including like charging or just basic PM, was like 266 days. So basically, from the moment you get it to the moment that something needs to be done because some component fails or some whatever service issue arises, is on average more than 266 days. And you need that. You need that. You need to be able to go for very long periods of time without any sort of disruption to their business. There are other things you can do. You need to be able to detect it. So the reason we built our fleet manager originally, like it is kind of, as I said, table stakes earlier. You need to have a fleet manager that coordinates your traffic management and everything else. And so it was something we needed to build regardless. But the main motivation originally is just to make sure that the vehicles are being used. If they're not being used, we need to be able to call them and say, hey, I see that you're not using, 5 of your 10 vehicles. Why? Is there something wrong with them? Can we fix it? Do we need to come out there? Like, let me help you solve this problem. And you have to be very hands-on in that first, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months to make sure that the adoption is going as well. Because it's not also, as I said earlier, just about the product or the technology. It's about the adoption, the customer success piece of it, to make sure that they're actually realizing whatever ROI or KPI they'd initially set out to achieve. And we can play a role in that. The benefit of autonomy is that we do get more visibility into the actual minute by minute operation than a typical forklift, manual forklift OEM would have, and that's powerful. So just making sure that we can support that uptime, make sure that when there is downtime, it's as small as possible. We've built our systems to be able to do a lot of remote troubleshooting. So one of the hardware components we built is something we call the Thin Man, which is a power distribution bus, and it's individually addressable. So we could power cycle the iPad, for example, that we use as a tablet. We could power cycle various other components as troubleshooting, opportunities remotely before we even have to come on site. This enables us to give better and more robust service. We've also, as I mentioned, we've been at the customer for 6 or 7 years, so we've built a lot of our hardware. It's a small thing, but our we call it the Erie control panel, the thing that sits kind of on top of our vehicles, has these hinges that you can just lift it up, and those hinges will keep it up instead of having to hold it with one hand and do whatever else inside. Like little things like that just make it a lot more serviceable, make things move a lot faster. Our camera assemblies were in the more recent versions are front facing, so you can unscrew them from the front instead of having to dig through the chassis to get to them. All these things make your downtime less and make service faster and less costly too, because you have a service guy on site for less time. Just making sure we really drill that in is critical to us.
Do you think customers usually get wrong when they're first thinking about automating material transportation?
What do they get wrong?
Yeah, what do you think they usually get wrong when they're first thinking about it?
Yeah,
Like, I think you mentioned some of their expectation and stuff like that, but then,
yeah. No, I'm trying to think about it. It's usually, I think, probably around expectation. Uh, I think most of the customers that I've dealt with are pretty good, and as I said, it's an educational conversation. And so I'll tell them basic numbers that we use to establish that ROI or that throughput, to make sure they can evaluate. It would be nice if a company like ours we could say, okay, are you evaluating your damage to the environment? Are you evaluating the wear and tear on the vehicles, on the energy usage that is better? Like those would all make us look better, but customers mostly don't really use that as a part of their calculation. And so, I mean, I guess I could say they get that piece wrong, but no, in general, it's just uh, they have a very conservative approach. They want to make sure it gets that ROI in 1 or 2 years. These are vehicles that last at least 5 years, maybe seven, 10, or even longer if you take better care of them. So I would also love if they just amortize it over that 10-year period because it again makes us look better. The ROI much higher. So there are things that I like to change, but those are things that are kind of structural to the industry, to what they're familiar with the manual equipment sales. One thing that we have worked with our manual partners is that we want the warranties to be longer. Because if we're looking to get like a 2-year ROI or better, then the warranty should include those 2 years so that it's easier math for them. They don't have to guess at what the warranty would be in that second year. And just trying to, and customers appreciate that. The higher quality machines actually perform better when autonomous because you want people to just not touch them, right? And you can be more confident that the people who do touch them are like I mean, it's the robot, the brain that touches it, right, that drives it around is going to be less harsh on it. It's not going to push the accelerator quite as quickly. It's, we have a lot more control over it. And so these machines can be kind of more tightly engineered for longer term use in ways that, support. But again, these are things that most customers aren't going to understand until they've had it for 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, makes sense. Where do you see? I want to talk about robotics in a bit more general terms before
Yeah.
we wrap the show and get your opinion here. But where do you see the biggest gap between what robotics companies want to build and what customers actually need?
Yeah, no, so I mean, robotics is cool. It's fun. You get a bunch of people like myself that went to school, that saw the DARPA Grand Challenge, that have all these really neat things they can do. I'll point a little bit to Boston Dynamics because I think they are an incredible company that has done incredible things, but they consistently fail to get a product that goes to market that is useful for the end customer. And like right now, there's all this discussion about humanoids, even within Anantak. A lot of our engineers are like, "Man, this is the coolest thing ever. What does this mean for us? It's going to replace everything." I'm like, "No, it's not. Like, there's no benefit in most industrial environments for having legs. Put something on wheels. The arms are pretty useful. I can see some value there. But again, like you need to stop designing in a vacuum. One of our core marketing pillars is engineering by experience. It's that we want to get out there, see what the actual need is, and then build the solution for that need, not to just guess what it is that we think customers may or may not want. And I think that's where a lot of the companies get wrong because I mean it's fun and it's easy to recruit talent to develop things like the humanoid robots or kind of all these other fancy systems, but they're just ultimately not the right fit for the customer and for what they need. The service is going to be much higher. The development costs, just everything just kind of balloons, and customers aren't interested in paying for that. That's not what they want to do. They just want to move material faster. They like their problems are when you get down to it, they're fairly like simple. That doesn't mean they're not complicated in the sense that they're not difficult to solve. But they're, I need my throughput to go from 5 to 7, or I need my safety instances to go from 5 a year to 0 or whatever. And the the autonomy OEM companies shouldn't feel constrained in any other way than those things to make it happen and to do that in the cheapest possible way.
Yeah, makes sense. Looking ahead 5 years, what do you think the warehouse automation landscape looks like?
So I imagine there's going to be at some point there's going to be consolidation. Where there'll be right now we have an awful lot of companies that are pursuing all sorts of things. I remember 2 or 3 years ago at ProMat, I think there were I felt like every other booth had one of those little square robots. I call them Kiva clones, but the platform robotics, and that's fine. But it's not just about building the hardware; it's about building that full solution, as I've said a couple of times. And so I don't know if I imagine there's going to be always a place for that. I don't think that's going to go away, but the number of people that are selling it now are far fewer than those that were selling it at that ProMat show that I was at a couple of years ago. I'm sure it'll be the same for the forklifts and the tuggers and the other kinds of vehicles that we're talking about today. I think that right now it's not too hard to find maybe 10 to 15 companies out there that are doing very similar to what we're doing on the outside. I would argue there are differences internally. And then I imagine that will kind of consolidate to some extent. I also think that right now, I remember when I was first looking at it maybe 5 years ago, um, no forklift went above like 5 feet. They all had this like maybe 3 or 4 thousand pound capacity max. There weren't really many tuggers, and to the extent that there were, they were kind of afterthoughts. Um, those numbers will continue to go up. And most people are getting that 360 inch or greater reach capability. Most people are getting more than 5 or 6 or 7 thousand pounds, or having some opportunity for that. And they're able to go in wider areas. It used to be a concern about how much of a space you could go in. There are all these like technical constraints about what the vehicle could do in that space. Most of those are kind of evaporating as they're getting solved and getting solved by each company. So it's kind of an industry is solving it. And so I think that there's going to be an acceleration. At some point, we'll hit that inflection point where we're going from, whatever it is, hundreds of units sold a year right now to tens of thousands of units sold. And that's where I think that will be a fully kind of embraced technology for the for this sector.
Do you think that the autonomous material handling becomes like a standard expectation in warehouses, the way that WMS or barcode scanning
Absolutely.
became standard. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you asked in 5 years. In 50 years, there's no doubt. Most warehouses will be kind of dark. There will be fewer people actually operating them. There'll be other jobs. And so when people ask about this, robots don't take jobs, they take tasks. They don't do the full thing. And I liken it to like having your washer or dryer. Those are technically robots in your house. I'm glad I don't have to walk down to the river with a washboard and clean each individual piece of clothing on the weekend. This will be kind of analogous to that. There'll be other different jobs that open up. Obviously, all the deployment technicians and robot service, people, et cetera, which is obviously directly from this. But other things that will be necessary as well. The companies are going to continue to spend money to grow and to develop and to, because if they don't, then they're going to get passed up by the competitors who do. And so, yes, in 50 years, it's very clear to me this technology. I thought it was pretty good 15 years ago, and it's been a long time since it's been developed. So it's pretty darn close to being able to solve all these problems. And in that long term, it definitely will. It will be fully adopted.
That's awesome. I like that. They take tasks, not jobs. That's awesome. Okay, last one. What are you most excited about in Antak's next chapter?
Yeah, so I mean, we're really excited about what we have to come. We feel like we have our well beyond our MVP and minimum viable products. We have our feet under us. We have not only the technology but also the business model, the partnership model, all that stuff established. And so we're looking forward to hitting the gas pedal when we can. We have a lot of opportunities. We had our very first show this year at Modex, and it was very successful. I sent out, in that following week, hundreds of emails from mostly customers that came to our booth that were interested in the technology. So that's exciting because I also think customers are recognizing that we're getting close to that inflection point, and they want to make sure that they're, engaged. And even better than that, I got responses to most of those emails. Like people are still continuing to engage. I've
Wow.
been doing lots of site visits. I've signed I don't know how many NDAs. All that kind of stuff is great, and it's a great sign for us. And so we're feeling like it's a good problem to have, but we need to make sure we have the capacity to support whatever opportunities come, to focus on the critical ones that we're already doing, and to just not lose track of the ball, keep our eye on the ball.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the show, Michael. I really enjoyed this and learning more about the company and how you think through it. And it's always, I think, refreshing and eye-opening to hear about real-world deployments and timelines and the value that it adds and how people are thinking about it. So I appreciate you sharing all of that.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate coming on the show and appreciate your time. So looking forward to more.
Thank you. How can our listeners learn more about you and the company and follow along for everything you guys are doing?
So we now have a wonderful new director of marketing we hired earlier this year that's managing our social media channels. So find us on LinkedIn primarily. We also have a YouTube channel. And of course, please come visit us at anantech.com. And you can get directly in contact with myself, with our sales team through that channel.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to link all of those in the show notes, and we'll keep in touch for any future shows and events that you guys might be at.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Greg. I appreciate your time.